Hello friends, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to the lecture, The Constitutional History of Great Britain and America, briefly. I shall begin my lecture by citing the name of one of the greatest constitutional experts, K.C. Weir, who considered the Constitution to be a document that describes the political system or the government of a country. In fact, a constitution is a bunch of political rules that regulate or govern a country. And being a political document, the political structures and institutions are deeply influenced by the historical background and the socio-political heritage of that country. This makes our discussion very vital today, and for the purpose of convenience, while focusing on the constitutional history of Great Britain and America, I have attempted to divide my lecture into three main sections. And in the first section, we shall concentrate and focus on the constitutional development of Great Britain. In section 2, I shall try to focus on America, and in the third section, which is the concluding section, I shall put forward my own views. To begin with the British Constitution, all of us know that it is best known as the mother of all constitutions in the world, primarily because of its influence in building up democratic traditions and influencing the growth of other constitutions in the world. In fact, the constitutional development of Britain has occurred till the present moment in a gradual but unhindered manner, unbroken for centuries and spread over several hundred of years or even thousands of years. Every development that has come about in the British Constitution in every moment can be said to be, following Freeman, has not been the introduction of any new principle absolutely, but the development and refinement of what was absolutely old or what we call ancient. The British Constitution, in fact, is vital for its contribution to the science of government and for cultivating a political mentality among people, for generating their faith in democratic institutions as well as in a limited constitutional monarchy. For the purpose of convenience, I have touched upon 6 main periods while discussing about the British Constitution. They are the Anglo-Saxon period, the Norman period, the Angevin period, the Tudors, the Stuarts, and lastly the Hanover period, which covers from roughly 400 AD to ending to 1837 AD approximately. The first period to which we can actually refer to when we discuss about the constitutional history of Great Britain are the Anglo-Saxons and the Danes, whose rule extended from 400 to roughly 1066 AD. The Anglo-Saxons, in fact, replaced the Celts and the Romans by the end of by the latter half of the 4th century AD, and they continued to rule till 1066 AD when William of Normandy conquered England. The main contribution that was made to political institutions and traditions in Great Britain during the Anglo-Saxon period was that they laid the foundation of kingship, which was to become the kernel for the development of the British Constitution in later years, and around which the British Constitution developed. However, the institution of kingship during the Anglo-Saxon period was not absolute. Another major contribution of the Anglo-Saxon period, which we should take new note of, is the introduction of local self-government and emphasizing the importance of local autonomy among the British people, which remains vital even to this day. The Norman period is important for restructuring the institution of kingship in Great Britain and making it absolute. The first task that William of Normandy undertook when he became the monarch of England was to adopt a centralized pattern of governance. The feudal system was also introduced in England during this time, and the king governed with the help of two bodies, the Great Council or the Magnum Concilium, and in the absence of the Great Council, the Little Council or the Curia Regis helped him to discharge his responsibilities. Apart from this, the church was made subservient to the state, and another contribution or development that took place during the Norman period was the propagation of common law. Hence, we conclude the Norman period by saying that the political institutions and the tradition that was there in Britain was more centralized and feudal in nature. The major contribution of the next period, that is the Angevin period, we find begins with the signing of the Great Charter, or what we call the Magna Carta, in 1215. Despite the Magna Carta of 1215 being considered to be an alliance between the king and the feudal lords, it did play a vital role in limiting the powers of the monarch in England and providing a charter of civil liberties and acting as a charter, in fact, of great rights for the British people. Another major contribution that was made during the Angevin period was an increase in the powers of the Parliament. In fact, the Parliament enjoyed the power to dethrone the king, and Edward was dethroned by the Parliament during the Angevin period. The next period to which we turn our attention is the Tudor period, which is well known in British constitutional history as the period of consolidation of power. The Tudor monarchs enjoyed wide powers, and the Parliament during this time really did not object to the exercise of royal despotism in any way. We now turn our attention to the Stuarts. That is, after the death of Queen Elizabeth, her cousin James II, in fact, assumed throne, who belonged to Scotland, and we find that because of his belief in the divine right of kingship and his love for the use of royal prerogatives, he soon came into conflict with the Parliament. In fact, during the reign of Charles I, the conflict between kingship and monarchy during the Stuart period assumed the proportion of a civil war. And finally, we find that in 1649, for the first time, Britain was declared to be a commonwealth or a republic, and a new constitution known as the Instrument of the Government was drafted, with Oliver Cromwell being appointed as the Lord Protector. However, Oliver Cromwell too came into conflict with the Parliament, and after his death, monarchy was restored. This time, the monarchs, however, were very careful not to go into any kind of direct confrontation with the Parliament, and they attempted to strike a balance between their own powers and that of the Parliament. But however, finally we find that the conflict between monarchy and the Parliament continued, as a result of which the famous Glorious Revolution of 1688 took place. We finally come to the Hanover period, which is important for the signing of another important charter, that is the Bill of Rights, which too guaranteed certain basic rights to the people and increased the powers of the Parliament by stressing on the importance of superiority of Parliament and emphasizing on constitutional monarchy in Britain. Hence, the cardinal principles of the British Constitution, that is, supremacy of Parliament and a limited and constitutional monarchy, were established by 1688 to 1689. However, any discussion on the British constitutional history will never be complete unless we touch upon the major developments in the political institutions that have occurred till date, which has made the constitutional history so very vital and so very rich. The first major development or the first major change, we can say, is the decline in the powers of the king, primarily due to the prevalence of democratic traditions and democratic political culture. The second is the democratization of the House of Commons, and which made the House of Commons one of the largest democratic parliamentary bodies in the world. The third change happened when the House of Commons assumed a position of superiority over the House of Lords over the years. And later we find with the emergence of the party system in Britain, we find Britain can now claim a democratic tradition in the world, which is very rich and which is something to fall upon. In fact, democratization of the House of Commons began with the Reform Act of 1832 and the People's Act of 1918 and 1928 contributed to it, while we find that the party system in Great Britain, which actually built up a democratic culture, began in the later Stuart period when the two vital political parties, the Whigs and the Tories, were identified as major players. And it developed further in the 19th century when the minority in the parliament was no longer looked upon as an opposition or an enemy, but referred to with great respect as His Majesty's opposition. Another major contribution, students, which I wish to mention, which is related to the decline of powers of the monarch, is the rise of the cabinet system of government in Britain, which took place in a predominant way by the end of the 18th century and assumed a very important function or significance by the end of the 19th century in Britain. After discussing the constitutional history of Great Britain, it is now time to pay our attention to another country, that is the United States of America. The story of the constitutional development and the emergence of United States of America as a sovereign state is a very interesting one. It began in 1776. In fact, United States of America can claim of having a very continuous and systematic growth of constitutional evolution, but most of the principles of and political traditions of the American Constitution are the product of the foresight and wisdom of its founding fathers. America came into existence not on the basis of any one particular ideology, but it came into existence on the basis of a continuous process of trial, error, and correction. On the one hand, we find that it has been influenced by the liberal ideas of John Locke, which inspired it to conduct a revolution against the tyranny of Englishmen, while on the other hand, it has gracefully accepted the principle of separation of powers advocated by Montesquieu as a very vital principle of government. And the most important contribution of the American Constitution to this date is the adoption of a federal model of government, and America can be considered to be the case of a classical federation which has influenced the development and growth of federations in other countries. America presently is a federation of 50 states, but we find that until 1776 it was a group of 13 colonies under the direct control of the British Empire. However, due to conflict regarding the distribution of powers between England and the colonies, the 13 colonies decided to go for a war, and they declared war against England. And as a result of that, we find that we have to take into account certain vital events if we need to get a clear and meaningful idea about the constitutional history of America. The Declaration of Independence, which took place for the colonies on 4th July 1776, begins the independent constitutional history of America in a systematic way, because it was the Declaration of Independence that proclaimed that the colonies were free and had become independent and exempted from any and every kind of loyalty and allegiance that they had to pay to the British Crown in any way. They were now independent sovereign states who had the power to either declare war, conclude peace treaties, and enjoy other powers. Thus, although the colonies were different in their patterns of government, there was a common ground between them, that is their love for liberty and the desire to establish a free government, which brought them together to declare war against England in a predominant way. After the Declaration of Independence, we find on 4th July 1776, on 7th July 1776, a committee was appointed for drafting the Articles of the Confederation that was formed by the independent states. On 15th November 1777, the Articles of Confederation were accepted by the Congress, and we find that the first article of the Confederation declared America to be a confederation, but it was more a kind of loose union of states, which Wilson rightly says it was more like a rope of sand with no strong bond. Within this confederation, each of the states retained their own independent powers, and although the Congress was appointed as the only institution to which delegates from each of the states had to be sent, however, the Congress in reality exercised very limited powers over the states. The colonies, in fact, finally won independence in 1783 by the Treaty of Versailles. After the common danger of winning independence by fighting against England took place, interstate conflicts now began to appear, which acted as a serious impediment to the functioning and the effective development and functioning of the American Confederation. One of the most vital conflicts that took place with regards to interstate conflicts is on the issue of navigation on the river Potomac between the states of Maryland and Virginia. To resolve this dispute, a conference was convened at Annapolis in 1786. But the tragedy of the Annapolis Conference is that it was attended only by 5 delegates. However, on the advice of Alexander Hamilton, a conference was convened later in 1787 at Philadelphia, and 73 delegates from 12 states agreed to participate in this convention. The Philadelphia Convention is very vital because it was in this convention that it was suggested that there might be proposals brought up for regarding the need to amend the Constitution. Despite limited participation in the Philadelphia Convention, Monroe rightly says that the Philadelphia Convention, with people like George Washington, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, represented people of widely different caliber. Ultimately, on September 17, 1787, a brief document embodying the principles of the Constitution was finally prepared, which came to be known as the American Constitution. This Constitution attempted to strike a balance between a strong central government on the one hand, as well as providing the maximum amount of independence to the states on the other. It was ratified by 9 states as agreed upon in the convention, and this constitution was finally enforced on March 4th, 1789. This constitution has brought about immense change in the nature of the American state. It enabled America to adopt the first federal model of governance, along with the first system of checks and balances, and it has made America one of the most dynamic and powerful nations of the world in the 21st century. Thus, the many compromises of the delegates and the individuals at the Philadelphia Convention that was arrived at to come to and attempted to come to a common ground regarding the drafting of the Constitution had been fulfilled, and the desire to build a welfare state on the basis of the constitutional vision of liberty and promotion of justice had been ensured. The new constitution brought about immense change in the nature of the states. Apart from adopting first federal form of government and the first principle of checks and balances, it is the oldest written constitution in the world which remains relevant and effective till date. Thus, the many compromises which were arrived at by the delegates at the Philadelphia Convention and the constitutional vision of America was fulfilled by the efforts of the founding fathers and the representatives of the states in making America a dynamic and a powerful nation of the world in the present century. Students, now I would like to conclude our discussion on the British and the American constitutional history by putting forward certain observations of my own. Now we find that both the constitutions differ in their historical legacy and in the nature of the political traditions. In this context, we need to remember that Britain continues to be unique in its political institutions developing and thriving and maintaining themselves on the basis of well-developed political traditions which have their roots in the past till date. In contrast to that, when we pay our attention to the American Constitution, one has to accept the fact that despite both being democratic, political traditions in America are not as old or ancient as that of Great Britain, but these traditions are also vital and have played a very important role in guiding the nation towards development and stability by promoting the ideas of freedom, justice, liberty, democracy, and protection of human rights. Thank you.